And going through the Bible by chapters today, we're in Exodus chapter 1. We can see some dramatic shifts between the relationships of the nation of Egypt and the Hebrew people who have come because of Joseph and his relationship to one of the pharaohs. And what's going to happen is a pharaoh is going to come to power who doesn't remember Joseph or the things that he did, or who doesn't care about Joseph and the things that he did. And Joseph interpreted some dreams for one of the past pharaohs, telling him to store up grain in years of plenty so that when a famine came, there would be food for everybody. In fact, there was so much food that this pharaoh was able to sell food and buy all the land of Egypt, kind of solidifying his power in the country and making sure that his dynasty would continue for years and generations to come. Well, this Pharaoh seems to be very concerned about those types of political things. And he looks throughout his country and he sees these Hebrew people who are dramatically outproducing and growing in much greater numbers than his own people are. And similar to some of the things you'll hear people talk about in our country today about being overrun by immigrants, in a country full of immigrants, by the way, we look and you can see some of those same concerns. And so the political concerns of years ago are still the political concerns that people have today. It's kind of interesting to see that people are always people. The only thing that changes is the times and the places. Well, this Pharaoh looks and he sees that these people are growing, so we have to do something about it. And so he pretty much turns them into slaves. And we think that many of the great monuments, many of the great statues in Egypt were built during this time when the Hebrew people, a vast number of people, are turned into slaves for the nation of Egypt. Well, that doesn't really work. The more he, steps on them, the more he tries to keep them from growing, the more God blesses them and the more God causes them to grow. And so he has a conversation with some midwives and he tells them, when you go to deliver a Hebrew baby, if the baby is a boy, kill it. If the baby is a daughter, that's fine. Well, I don't know how legalistic the people were in ancient Egypt. I don't know how their laws really worked. But the Pharaoh calls these midwives before him because they didn't obey his orders. The text tells us that they feared the Lord, and so they weren't doing what Pharaoh told them to do. Now, for us today, there may be situations where we find ourselves in a place or in some kind of conundrum where we have to make the decision, am I going to obey God or am I going to do what my country, my state, my city, as the case may be, is telling me to do? If we have to choose to obey God instead of the government, that doesn't mean we won't be called to account. That doesn't mean we won't be punished. What it does mean is that we can have an eternal hope, an eternal security in knowing that we are doing the Lord's will rather than man's will. And even if they do kill us, even if we are punished for doing what is right, we have an eternal home which no one can take away from us. These midwives in ancient Egypt understood that, and so they feared the Lord rather than the Pharaoh, who could kill them or take away all their stuff. But they're called before him, and this is the answer they give him. And they say, the Hebrew women, they're more vigorous, they're more full of life and energy than the Egyptian women. And so by the time we get there to help, the baby's already born. And now if we look very carefully at what Pharaoh said, we're going to read literally from the text. He says, when you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them as they deliver. If the child is a son, kill him, but if it is a daughter, she may live. Now, if you take the Pharaoh's command literally, he says, when you're helping them give birth, do these things. And so if they just kind of chill out for a while and wait for the Hebrew woman to give birth and then go help, well, they can't carry out Pharaoh's commands, can they? Pharaoh kind of recognizes what's going on, and he still is set on oppressing these people and keeping them from growing, even though it's not God's plan to have them take over Egypt. And he decides just toss them into the river Nile. If a child is born and it is a boy, I don't care if you're there to help, I don't care if you're there to deliver it. If a Hebrew woman has a male child, you throw it into the river and you let it die. And this is going to set the stage for Moses' early life with his mother. And we're going to see the bravery of his mother, Jochebed, and the things that she does to keep her child alive.